All right. Thank you, Jared, and thank you, everyone. I see we have 19 participants at tonight's public hearing, including 11 attendees from the public. My name is Dan McKiernan. I'm the director at the Division of Marine Fisheries. I'm also the uh, lead on for the state of Massachusetts on the American Lobster Management Board at the ASMFC. So tonight, we're having a public hearing on, and this is a little complicated, but we're having a public hearing on an emergency regulation that DMF has enacted. And in order for us to make an emergency regulation permanent, we need to hold a hearing and have our Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission vote this up as a permanent regulation. So tonight, under the provisions of General Law 30A, as well as General Law 130, Sections 17A, 21, and 104. We're taking comment on these emergency regulations, and then we will accept comments through Friday at 5 o'clock. And then next week on Thursday, our Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission will vote on my recommendation to make these regulations, when I say permanent, uh, uh, a regulation that's fully codified and would take another regulation to reverse that change. So tonight we have a very brief agenda. I'm going to go over how Addendum 27 was established, how it unraveled, and then how this Addendum 32 of the Interstate Management Plan of the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission was passed by the board, for which we came home at DMF and we are making changes consistent with that which the ASMFC changed as part of the interstate management process. Timeline for rulemaking is, like I said, we've already enacted the emergency rules, which means that rules that were scheduled to go into effect on July 1st, won't be. And now I need to make this rule permanent, and that's what this particular public hearing is about. If we didn't take any action, then this emergency rule after 90 days would simply expire, meaning that those features of Addendum 27, which we're going to talk about in a minute, would be in effect. Anyway, so the commission's going to vote next week, and then by final rule will definitely be in effect by August 1st. So the background on Addendum 27. Back in August of 2017, the board, at the urging of some of the main leadership, expressing concerns about declines in landings and declines in pre-recruit numbers of juvenile lobsters, wanted to come up with a strategy where if the stock declined below a certain threshold, we could take action to build the resiliency of the population, specifically to increase the spawning stock biomass. We kind of postponed some of those actions for a couple of years because we were very much involved with a lot of large whale take reduction team proposed regulations, and knowing that it was going to, we were going to be asking our lobster technical folks to be working on two fronts. We decided to address first a lot of the right whale and large whale take reduction team challenges. So when the benchmark assessment came out in 2020, we took a new look at this one. And in May of 2023, the board approved Addendum 27 for implementation on June 1st, 2024. What it did was it made some particular issues standardized within the LMAs, and the two issues there are the V-notch measure regarding the possession standard for Outer Cape Cod, as well as the maximum size. Both of those were applying to the federal permit holders, but not to the state permit holders. And then the second issue had to do with the trap tag issuance in Area 1 and Area 3, where, especially for Area 1, Maine had not been allowing their fishermen to automatically obtain 10% extra trap tags. And New Hampshire and Mass will continue to do that. And so after some discussion at the board, we decided to make those approaches more standard, where in Area 1 and in Area 3, the trap tag orders that fishermen put in every year would just be for the trap limit in Area 1 or the individual trap allocation in Area 3. In October of 23, we got together at the ASMFC, and lo and behold, what we discovered was that the index of abundance that the technical committee had designed had already been triggered. In other words, the decline in the stock, as measured by an index, and it's an amalgamation of the trawl survey and the ventless trap results, had already dropped below the 35% threshold that was voted up in area of that was voted up as part of Addendum 27. And that came up as a little bit of a surprise, even to the folks who were fully supportive of the measure, that we didn't think we were going to hit this so quickly, just a half a year, or less than half a year after it was adopted. So there was a vote to postpone the implementation from June 1st, 2024, an additional 7 months, because we were told that the gauge manufacturers needed more time to produce the available stock. And so we postponed that until January 21st, 2025. We also had some support from law enforcement folks saying that if you're going to be changing rules, it's better to change them kind of in the lull of the winter, as opposed to in the middle of a fishing season. And then in October 2024, we voted another delay because of what was brought to our attention of the dealer sector expressed a lot of concern about the importation of non-conforming Canadian lobsters and the need to resolve those differences. There were questions about which rules would apply. And so we voted up another delay until July 1st, 2025. We also spent some considerable time in conversations with the Canadians. I personally traveled up to St. John, New Brunswick last June, and we met with the leaders of a lot of the lobster fishing area associations in Canada, and tried to convince them of the wisdom of kind of adopting similar measures. And we had some support in the room, but the Canadian management process is much different. So, we weren't going to get any commitments at that time. But I think there was some interest among the Canadian fishermen, because they had seen similar trends in the landings in their side of the Gulf of Maine, where there was a decline of about 30% over the last 6 or 7, 8 years. So that's where we wound up. Everything was supposed to be adopted by the 1st of this year. And so the next slide, Jared. Okay, so this is just a quick matrix breakdown of the rules that were approved as part of 27. Again, effective July 1st. Although actually it's effective, Massachusetts, New Hampshire put I'm sorry, July 1st, we were going to increase the minimum size from 3¼ to 3 5/16. The trap tag issuance, it says July 1st, but we had already enacted that withholding of the extra 10% effective this fishing year. So last winter, all the Area 1 permit holders in Area 3 were put on notice that when you order your trap tags, you'll be ordering either no more than 800 in Area 1 or your allocation in Area 3. And then in the Outer Cape and the recreational fishery in the Outer Cape, we were intending to establish a common maximum size of 6¾ The federal maximum size of 6¾ has been in place for, I don't know, about 14 years. And then changing the V-notch standards from the 1/4-inch sharp V-notch without cedal hairs to an 1/8-inch V-notch with or without cedal hairs. And the essence of that change results in the lobsters that have been notched probably surviving or being protected from harvest for 1 to 2 additional molts. As the lobster molts over time, that injury, the V-shaped notch in that tail flipper slowly fills in at each molt. And so incrementally, it begins to disappear. So this 1/8-inch is expected to give that lobster another one, on average, like 1.5 molts. But in other words, there's some that would get 1 more molt. Others, depending on the nature of the animal, might get 2 more molts of protection. On July 1st, no changes. And then next year, 2 years out, we would be changing the minimum size again in the Area 1. And then the following year, we would be changing the trap escape vent size to match the minimum size vent size combination that we see in the other areas where we have a 3 3/8 minimum size. Those areas include Outer Cape and Area 2, and I believe some of the areas to the west off of New York and the Mid-Atlantic. And then the year after that, July 1st, 2029, the maximum size was scheduled for Area 3, and the Outer Cape would have been scheduled to come down just 1/4 inch from 6 3/4 to 6.5. So we think, let me see, Jared, I've got 2 screens here, so hold on. Okay. So we adopted the regulations back in, actually our commission voted the regulations in the summer, and then they revoted them in the fall with an effective date of July 1st, 2025. But the regulations themselves were codified, so they actually exist in the CMR as codified regulations with an effective date of July 1st. So, and those regulations were to no longer issue those extra 10% tags for 1 and 3, the Area 1 minimum size, and the additional gauge increases. All were built into the regulations on various schedules. Seafood dealers were prohibited from buying non-conforming lobsters, but we're going to be given 90 days through the end of September to unload inventory of previously purchased lobsters. This is pretty typical that anytime there's a gauge increase, we usually give the dealers enough time to get rid of their inventory. And then the recreational fishery, we would have adopted the minimum gauge size increases and the escape vent changes as is similar. Outer Cape recreational area, same thing. We adopted the maximum size gauge changes that was scheduled, and the eventual increase later in the schedule down to 2029. So it all unraveled between the fall meeting and January, when the Maine's industry were present at 2 public hearings, and I would just say that it was quite an animated a couple of events, especially the second one. And I think most of you who are attending are familiar with some of the spirited exchanges between the former commissioner of the state of Maine and the lobster industry, mainly the harvesters. So there was a lot of concerns about trade with Canada. I was up at the Lobster Town meeting in Bar Harbor, Maine, and that's a joint meeting of Canadian interest and U.S. interests. And there was a lot of concern there. There was also a lot of concerns about upcoming tariffs that the U.S. Administration was pondering. And so, during a lot of the deliberations that we had, when I say we, DMF, with our Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission, I was asked, what will happen if some of the states renege and don't go forward? Will Massachusetts go forward? And I assured everyone that that we would always strive to make the rules consistent for fishermen, fishing side by side in the same lobster management area. And so when Maine announced unexpectedly, to me anyway, that they were going to quote unquote pull the rule, obviously it was a disappointment, because we had already enacted the rules, which means we're going through a lot of this process tonight, because we have to unravel them now. In addition, the state of New Hampshire also announced that they intended on not complying with the gauge increases. So the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission was obviously challenged to deal with this, because the addendum had already been approved. There is a method to bring states into compliance. States can be found out of compliance by their peers of the other states, and a formal vote of the ASMFC board and then the policy board. But the leadership at ASMFC decided that, and I should say, when a state is found out of compliance, it's up to the Secretary of Commerce, upon request of the ASMFC, to look into the situation and request that they could take action against the state, including shutting the fishery in that state down. So the leadership at ASMFC and the board decided it was probably best to peel back the regulations on the gauge size changes and the accompanying vent sizes. And so that's what was voted on as part of it, so-called Addendum 32. And so that's why we're here tonight, because the board in February approved Addendum 32. It wasn't a complete repeal of Addendum 27. As I mentioned before, Addendum 27 also has the 10% extra trap tags, and also has the common V-notch possession definition for out of Cape Cod. So, but the board, after a couple of votes, decided what they wanted to repeal were the gauge size changes and the escape vent size changes as well. So that went to an ASMFC public hearing, and then earlier this month, the board approved Addendum 32, and so that's where we're at tonight. So we're going to take comments on on the action to repeal those gauges, and we'll take your comments. So once you give us your comments, I'll be making a final recommendation to the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission at the meeting next week. A vote will be taken, and we'll be able to make that rule permanent. If we don't take the vote, if I don't make a proposal and don't get approved by the commission at next week's meeting, then the rules that we just recently pulled back by emergency, that emergency rule would expire and the gauge increases would come back to life. So here's a summary of the rules across the various issues and the LMAs that will be in effect should this emergency rule, well, they're in effect now, and we want to make these rules permanent. So in Area 1, we're going to have maintain the 3¼ inch minimum size, the 5-inch max, the same escape vent that they've had for 25 years, and the so-called zero tolerance V notch, which is a V-shaped notch of any size. In the Outer Cape State fishery, note we're not proposing any change, but just so it's clear, the same size limit remains. There won't be a maximum size because the board in their motion to repeal the gauge changes of a 27 failed to include that. So as a result, the state permit holders in the Outer Cape Cod area will be able to retain lobsters larger than 6¾ inches. Escape fence is the same. And then the V-notch standard is 1/8 inch deep, which is essentially any indentation, not just a V-shaped notch. And that's part of the controversy. A V-notch is the definition about the details of the shape of the notch, but 1/8 inch is the standard that the Area 3 vessels have had for, I think, about 15 years, and as well as Area 2. And then Outer Cape federal permit holders, no change for them. Still the same minimum size, still the same maximum size of 6¾ same escape fence, and they've had the 1/8 inch V notch for about 15 years. Our recreational fishery goes back to, remains at 3¼ 5-inch maximum, same escape vent that they've had for many years. But we do have a 1/8 inch V notch for the recreational fishery. And then the Outer Cape recreational fishery has a common minimum size with the commercial fishery of 3 3/8. They won't have a maximum size either. And then on the V notch standard, again, the 1/8 inch with or without cedar has 1/8 inch any indentation. So next slide, Jared. All right, questions and comments. So again, this is about enacting the rules that we've put into place, as to be consistent with the interstate plan, Addendum 32. And if we don't make the rule permanent, then the Addendum 32 in its entirety would basically come back to life. And it's going to be my recommendation to go forward with a final regulation to make these rules permanent. But we're happy to take any questions and comments about these proposals to change the minimum size for Area 1 and to repeal the maximum gauges that were planned for the Outer Cape, as well as the vent sizes for Area 1.
All right, everyone. So if you use the raise hand function, that will create a queue, and I will call on you based on that queue. Brandon Adams, you're recognized. You can unmute yourself. You there, Brendan?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can now, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm making this comment as president for Outer Cape Lobstermen Association. And like this whole thing, all right. So Maine gets away with everything. You guys don't make any changes to Maine. I mean, I understand this is a state meeting. We've all given comment at at everything on this. And the only change that's going to happen for Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and other states to the south is that only us 44 people get a V-notch definition change. So you take our awesome V-notch definition that's enforceable on the spot and you give us, for the sake of enforcement, in writing from you guys. You guys are going to give us this other V-notch definition. And like we've asked you and told you, and we've asked nicely, and you are forcing litigation on the state and ASMFC if you go with that. Okay. So if you can unravel that, which you can, all right, you don't have to do what ASMFC says. Okay. What happened in New Jersey or Maryland or whoever that was that didn't listen to the striped bass laws when they said, no, we're not going to comply with that? Nothing happened. You guys are, nothing's ever happened to any state that did not comply with ASMFC. Okay. But you guys trade a lot back and forth, okay, with other fisheries. And this is crap. We're not area 1 out here in the Outer Cape. We're not area 3. Okay. So if you want to give us all 800 trap allocations, or you want to give us, I don't even know what the maximum for area 3 is. What is that? 1,600 traps, 1,500 traps. If you want to give us the full allocation for area 3, and I know that neither of those options is viable due to the whales, right? I'm not trying to be like combative here, but you know, you're forcing us to come after you guys. I'm sorry about it. Okay. We've asked nicely. We've commented nicely, but you know, we already like went to a larger, smaller gauge during the 2000 agreement with the feds. Okay. Which it might not even have been 3 3/8. It might have been 3 5/16 minimum gauge. Our egg production increased 2.5 times. Okay. So if that's at 3 5/16 when that happened and we went to 3 3/8, we're way beyond that. We're not getting, it's hard to like take this when you guys tell us, you and the ASMFC, well, you guys don't really count. There's only a couple of you. And it's we're the low hanging fruit, and this isn't okay. We're going to have to fight it. I'm sorry, but that's where it is. That's all I got for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Brendan. Sam Blatchley, you're recognized.
Hi, Jared. Can you hear me?
I can, Sam.
I just had a quick question for Dan. When he said the emergency rules went into effect in early May of 2025, that means that they were put on the books but the V-notch definition isn't in effect, isn't going to be enforced until July if this moves forward. Is that correct?
Yes, Sam, that's correct. So the emergency regulations went into effect right after the ASMFC approved Addendum 32 for implementation, which peeled back everything that would have been implemented under Addendum 27, but not Addendum 32 beginning on July 1, 2025. And what remains in effect is the trap tag standardization rules that went into effect for the 2025 permitting season, and the VNOT standardization rules, which will go into effect on July 1, 2025, consistent with what remains of Addendum 27.
Okay. And then thank you for that, Jared. That makes sense. And I'm just going to go forward with my comment. Some of it will be repetitive of what we've said at the ASMFC, but just for the sake of the record, to preserve my client's rights. My name's Sam Blatchley. I represent Outer Capes Lobstermen's Association. We're a nonprofit that represents approximately 44 permit holders who harvest lobster in the Outer Cape Lobster Conservation Management Area. I'm also speaking on behalf of myself as a citizen and resident of New Bedford, Massachusetts. The Outer Capes Lobstermen's Association will, of course, submit a detailed written comment opposing the regulation to standardize the V-notch possession definition for OCC permit holders. But today I just wanted to underscore a few points. We think, as I've said before at ASMFC meetings, proposal undermines a legally binding, scientifically grounded, and equitably crafted settlement, served the resource and the fishery for over 2 decades. There's been a lot of talk about the importance of science in management decisions, and I think that's important. And I'll offer some. In 2000, after a federal lawsuit, Outer Capes Lobstermen's Association versus the ASMFC et al., which was case number 98 CV-10165 before Judge Young, the Outer Capes Lobstermen's Association, the ASMFC, and the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries reached a settlement. We think that settlement was rooted in scientific analysis and allowed the OCC to adopt a conservation equivalency measure, which was a minimum gauge size increase to 3 5/16 inches in lieu of mandatory V-notching. That analysis, as we understand it, was led by then senior marine fisheries biologist Bruce Estrella and marine fisheries biologist Robert Glenn, who's now, we understand, DMF's deputy director. They conducted a management measure conservation equivalency review. Deputy Director Glenn's review highlighted 8 biological concerns with mandatory V-notching, 3 of which I just want to emphasize. 1, increased risk of disease transmission due to breaches in the integument caused by V-notching. 2, potential egg loss due to increased handling from V-notching. 3, V-notched egg-bearing females receive double credit protection, both for being V-notched and for being buried. Using the egg per recruit model developed by Joseph Idaween, if I pronounce that, I apologize, of NIMS, and utilized by the ASMFC across U.S. lobster stocks, Mr. Glenn concluded in 2000 that the OCC plan yielded a 1.338% increase in egg production, more than 2.5 times the 0.502% increase under then existing ASMFC measures of a 3 1/4-inch gauge and mandatory V-notching. This was a scientifically validated win for both conservation and the fishing community. As we mentioned before, the soundness was not merely theoretical. Former DMF Director Philip Coates declared in March 2000 Cape Cod Times article, "Lobsters, our most important coastal resource, and we're not going to save the lobster resource with V-notching in a maximum gauge. In my heart, I know the Outer Cape lobstermen are correct. There should be real trap reductions and an increase in the minimum size." His successor, Paul Diodati, recognized the success of this model and sought to expand it statewide. Today, we believe the OCC fishery stands as a testament to that success, remains vibrant, resilient, and has notably younger in demographics. And that's not scientific, but just looking, you can see notably younger in demographics than the other lobster management areas. An indicator that it attracts and retains new entrants to the lobster fishery, which I think is a concern going forward. We think that this regulation threatens to unravel the framework. The stated goal is enforcement uniformity. It's not a conservation necessity. It does not justify nullifying a court-supervised agreement that has produced quantifiable biological gains. It's no longer speculation on the OCC, the Outer Capes Lobstermen's Association's part. In a recent memorandum, DMF Director McKiernan candidly confirmed, quote, "The purpose of the V-notch rule is standardization within the LCMA and the V-notch standardization measure, as well as the maximum gauge size measure for which they will get reprieved, were scheduled to go into effect for 2025, irrespective of the trigger-based conservation measures." He continued, "Given my respect for the ASMFC process, I also have no intention to pursue non-compliance like Maine and New Hampshire threatened. So the state waters only OCC LCMA fishers can maintain a 1/4-inch V-notch standard. It's a pivotal admission in our view. The proposal is not about conservation. It's about standardization and avoiding a perceived lack of uniformity. We don't think this is a lawful basis to abrogate a binding settlement agreement, or a more effective conservation regime. We also are concerned that, the OCC is being targeted in the name of uniformity. Maine has been allowed to retain lower gauge sizes, evading Addendum 27's intended protections for the Gulf of Maine and spawning stock. So we just think it's selective enforcement. It's not just contrary to law, it's arbitrary and capricious, and it's poor fishery management. We think it dismisses science, fairness, and precedent and risks unnecessary litigation. We're prepared to reopen the federal case to enforce the 2000 settlement should this regulation be enacted. Upholding the plan is not just a legal obligation, it's a commitment to equity, sustainability, and cooperative fishery management. My clients remain dedicated to dialogue and collaboration. So if there's any way we could resolve this short of going to court, I think we'd be very open to that. Thank you for your time and thoughtful consideration, and thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Sam. I'm not seeing any further hands raised, Dan. So if you want, we got 2 new ones. All right, Jeff Souza, you're recognized.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff Souza, out of Cape Lobsterman. I'll keep it short since I've been on every meeting thus far and stated my opinions and written comments, so everyone knows how I feel about this. But this addendum should have another part of it, and that's to repeal everything. It should be all or none, so again, like stated before, Maine cries, no, we're not going to do it. And now the 6,000 licenses don't do anything. And about this being uniformity, all the definitions are still not uniformed. And if we want uniformity, then hey, let's pick the control date that Out of Cape picked when we did our management plan, and all the Area 1 guys get trap reductions back to them. That's the point, is we had different management plans for a reason. It was a give and take. So now, if we're the ones that keep giving, there's 44 of us. And on these meetings, majority of the people on the meetings are from Out of Cape. So the 1,000 licenses in the state, these guys aren't involved in this because, again, they know it's not going to affect them because they're Area 1. So they know that Maine is not going to screw Area 1. I understand what the state's doing with this addendum because of the other states backing out, and this put, DMF in a bad position. But in the same token, is DMF could have fought for this addendum to include repealing the V-notch definition for Out of Cape. With the new definition, our old definition was a sharp V. So if we went to court, there was a case. If an environmental police officer took me to court over it, and we sat in front of a judge, that judge could look at that and say, yep, that's a V-notch. Now, how much money is going to be spent? If they write me up, I'm going to court over it. And it's going to be, well, is this a V? Is it not a V? To me, a definition of a V should state like a V-shaped notch coming to a sharp point. There's a difference between a V and a U. I barely passed high school with my cursive, but this definition, it's just going to cause issues, and we're going to be in court a lot. And, some lawyers are going to make out from it. I don't think the state will. I think our lawyer will. With that, again, I would ask for when this goes in front of the Massachusetts board next week, which I'll also be on that meeting, bothering all of you, is that it's brought up that Out of Cape should be included in this, that the 6,000 licenses that on the ASFC meeting kept reminding me that they catch 90% of the lobsters, they don't have to do anything. So, okay, so if you catch 90%, then why aren't you doing something? So the guys from Maine want to sit there and say they catch 90%, but they don't want any changes. And all this is going to do is the next addendum that comes out, guess what? That maximum gauge is going to go back on this. In Dan's words today at this meeting, which I hope is recorded, he seemed upset that the maximum gauge out of Cape was not taken out of this addendum. In other words, to me, the way that I interpreted that was he wishes that we had that oversized gauge on us. So to me, this is just, it's a targeted attack, the way that DMF can do it against out of Cape. This has nothing to do with ASMFC. ASMFC want to throw everything out except for out of Cape.
Thank you, Jeff. Sam Picard, you're recognized.
Can you hear me, Jared?
I can, Sam. Go right ahead.
I have a question and a comment today. I have a question for Mr. McKernan. Can you hear me, Dan?
Yeah, go ahead.
As some of my previous Outer Cape Lobstermen have spoken, once again, my name is Sam Picard. I'm the Vice President of the Outer Cape Lobstermen's Association. Thank you for letting me speak today. I got a question for you, Dan. In all of the meetings, the Outer Cape has been the majority of the comments in Massachusetts. As a director, you're supposed to take our comments and think on them and make the best, as you guys say, best available, use the best available data to move forwards. If our comments are the majority, why has our comments fallen on deaf ears? And the other question I have for you is the Outer Cape State Fishery has less than 18,000 tags in it, or 18,000 traps, I should say. The state of Maine has over 6,000 with 800 allocation or tags or traps, depending on what you want to use for a word, which comes out to 4.8 million traps in the water. We are a percent of a percent of a percent of the amount of traps in the water on the eastern seaboard. Why are we, as the 44 people, being penalized and just, in my opinion, discriminated against when all their respective leaders in New Hampshire as well as Maine, when this amendment came through, said no way is this going to happen in our states. They went to bat for their fishermen. Why are the 44 Outer Cape fishermen being left out to dry? Could you answer that for me, please, Dan?
Sam, I don't agree with much of your premise that, that the Commonwealth isn't interested in looking out for the interest of its fishermen. There are 800 Area 1 lobstermen who no longer have access to 80 tags apiece. And that was a standardization measure. As far as this standardization measure, while you're focused on your view that it's not standard between you and between your area and Area 1, there are about 24 federal permit holders in the Outer Cape, and they've been largely silent on this. But I suspect that they probably don't feel that it's fair, that they should have a more restrictive measure because you guys are fishing side by side. And that's another angle of this issue about consistency of rules among fishermen fishing in the same LMA.
Well, Dan, to go back to your statement there, the Area 1 guys, they haven't lost 80 tags. That was a duplicate tag. Their maximum is 800. And according to you, that we can fill out paperwork and get those tags from the state if we lose the traps. So they're not losing anything. They're just not automatically given the duplicate tags because they already have 800. So they are still allowed their 800 maximum tags. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So they have not lost 80 tags. If they lost 80 tags,
Well, they
air-
don't automatically get it, Sam, and we'd be looking at this, trying to use some discretion.
So
But
you-
anyway, Sam, you know, the issue tonight is whether we're going to adopt the ASMFC addendum. And what you're describing and what you know Jeffrey described and what Attorney Blatchley described is basically already codified in the state rules.
Well, my question is this then. If Amendment 27 was designed for conservation and the uniform across the board, correct?
No, it was designed to create uniformity among permit holders fishing in the same LMA.
So Amendment 27 wasn't created for conservation?
No, you didn't say that. I said,
Yes, I did, Dan.
all right. Sam, well, I'll just take your comments. Go ahead. I really can't debate this in an open forum with you because what we're talking about tonight are rules that we're proposing. You're talking about you want to debate rules that are already in place, and that maybe we can just have a separate meeting on that.
No, I'll finish my comment, and I apologize if I got off track. The reason I potentially got off track was because this amendment directly relates to Amendment 27. This amendment was put in place to fix some of the problems in Amendment 27. However, by doing that, should scrap Amendment 27 because Amendment 27 was put forward for conservation. However, moving forwards, what is left in Amendment 27 does little or no conservation. It is now penalized 44 stakeholders, 44 state fishermen in the Outer Cape Zone. So we've done little to no conservation across the board. All you've done is discriminate against 44 people in the Outer Cape Zone. And unfortunately, we're pursuing legal action now. Thank you for your time and allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Sam. Are there any other attendees here tonight who would like to make a comment on Addendum 32 or the state implementation of Addendum 32? Going once. Going twice. Dan, I'll turn this back over to you to close out the hearing.
All right, Jared, thank you. So the comment period stays open through May 23rd, which I believe is Friday. Our commission will vote on these to make these rules permanent on Thursday, the 29th. So thank you for your comments. We're familiar with them. Looking forward to, you know, where this goes next. I know there's been a lot of talk about legal proceedings, so we'll just have to prepare for that. But thank you for attending and thank you for your comments.